This presentation looks at the possibility of a third temple being built in the city of Jerusalem in the Holy Land. Now, the first temple was built in Jerusalem in 964 BC during the reign of King Solomon, and then it was destroyed in 587 BC by the Babylonians. The second temple was built on the site of the first temple in Jerusalem in 516 BC by the Jews who returned from their Babylonian exile. But in the book of the prophet Ezekiel in the Bible, a new third temple is prophesied. 8 chapters in the book of Ezekiel refers to this future event. But if this is a literal temple, then who will build it? Currently, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is dominated by a Muslim shrine and mosque. Moreover, access to the Temple Mount area is very restricted. It's dominated by a Muslim shrine known as the Dome of the Rock and by the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But Israeli Jews are actively preparing to build a new temple in the city. Preparations for this new temple are being made at the Temple Institute, which is near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. All the artifacts are on display, already prepared in the Temple Institute.
Jerusalem, eternal city of God. The very word is a symphony to the ear for all to whom the Bible is precious. And at the heart of Jerusalem lies its secret, the holy temple on Mount Moriah, place of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, called by Isaiah the house of prayer for all nations. For 2,000 years the Jewish people have prayed to return to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem, and to rebuild the holy temple. Today, we have returned. The city of Jerusalem is built up, a thriving, vibrant city. But what of Jerusalem's secret? What of the dream? For over 2 decades, the Temple Institute has been recreating the biblically appointed vessels to be used in the Holy Temple in preparation for its rebuilding. Tens of sacred vessels have been completed. These vessels and priestly garments, on exhibit in the Temple Institute's Treasures of the Holy Temple exhibition in Jerusalem's Old City, are not copies or replicas, but are actually fit to be used according to strict biblical standards in the new Holy Temple. Original source materials such as gold, silver, and copper, and the original sizes and measurements are used exclusively. Each year, 100,000 visitors come to see, learn about, and experience the promise of the Holy Temple. A visit to the Temple Institute is the highlight of a trip to Israel, for in the presence of these vessels, one can feel that the time of the redemption is indeed drawing close. The golden menorah, the golden table of the showbread, the incense altar, and tens of other sacred vessels have been painstakingly and precisely recreated. Silver trumpets, Levitical harps, and lyres are ready to be heard once again in the streets of Jerusalem. The priestly garments, including the uniform of the high priest, the ephod, the breastplate, and the golden crown, the result of years of intense research and the efforts of Israel's finest artists and craftsmen, are on display for all to see. The Temple Institute provides specially trained guides who explain the history of the Holy Temple, the nature of the divine service, and the significance of the Holy Temple for all mankind.
A recent article in the Daily Telegraph, the writer says, "Welcome to the Temple Institute exhibition in the heart of the old city of Jerusalem. This is not a museum," insists Rabbi Rickman, the international director. "Every artifact on display has been painstakingly created in accordance with biblical instructions and is intended for actual service in a third Jewish temple, which will be built as soon as possible." The Times of Israel article says the Temple Institute, which has recreated 60 vessels to be used in a third temple and which sponsors educational programs about the temple worldwide, it would usher in a new era of universal harmony and peace as prophesied in the Bible. According to Rabbi Chaim Rickman, the Institute's international director, the temple would stand in the present location of the Dome of the Rock, a Muslim shrine. Plans and materials and artifacts and even the priest's garments have all been prepared. The proposed site for the new temple in Jerusalem is on the Temple Mount. The Bible prophet Ezekiel gave very detailed plans for the building of this new temple in Jerusalem. It would coincide with the arrival of Israel's promised ruler, the Messiah. The Bible prophet Isaiah predicted that in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house, and must mean the temple, shall be established, and all nations shall flow into it. For out of Zion or Jerusalem shall go forth the law. The Bible prophet Isaiah also predicted, "Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem a quiet habitation, a tabernacle," again a reference to the temple, "that shall not be taken down, not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed." It was to be a temple that wouldn't be destroyed by conquest. The Bible prophet Malachi predicted, "The Lord whom ye seek," clearly referring to the Messiah, "shall suddenly come to his temple, and then shall the offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord." The Bible prophet Amos, "In that day will I raise up the tabernacle, the temple of David that is fallen, and I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land." The Bible prophet Haggai also predicted that the desire of all nations shall come, a reference that most scholars would attribute to meaning the Messiah. "And I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former, saith the Lord of hosts. And in this place will I give peace." Prophet Zechariah, "The pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts. And all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them." numerous predictions in the Hebrew scriptures to the third temple. In Ezekiel's vision, in Ezekiel chapter 43, we read, "The glory of the Lord filled the house. And I heard him speaking unto me out of the house, and said unto me, Son of man, the place of my throne, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever." And in the New Testament, a reference to a future temple. "Behold, I come quickly," says the Apostle John in his Revelation. "Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God." Clearly indicating a temple will be present at the return of the Messiah. But we must consider that most of the 12 tribes, including much of Judah, were taken captive to Media in northwest Iran in the 8th century BC, never returned to Palestine, a region at that time which was part of the Assyrian Empire. Historical and archaeological evidence, both biblical and secular, demonstrates that most of Jacob Israel's 12 tribes, millions of them, must have left the Holy Land either before or after the Assyrian captivities in the 8th century BC. Their descendants of Gentiles formed the Christian nations in Asia and Europe. Captives from other provinces conquered by the Assyrians were placed in the northern Palestine area instead of the Israelites. The inhabitants of Jerusalem were then almost the only Israelites left in what we now know as Palestine. A century later, the inhabitants of Jerusalem were exiled in Babylon, but some later returned to Jerusalem. Those who returned from Babylon rebuilt the temple. This was the second temple, and they then became known as Jews. This temple lasted for a few hundred years, but then the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD. The Roman Emperor Vespasian struck a coin in AD 71 to celebrate the destruction of Jerusalem. Ivdia Capta was the inscription. Judea conquered. Temple destroyed. Francesco Hayes attempts to illustrate this in his painting of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Roman army. The 1st century AD Jewish historian Josephus records the non-Jewish tribes of Israel that had been deported into Assyria, that they were beyond the Holy Land, and they were an immense multitude, not to be estimated by numbers. According to the 5th century BC Jewish scribe Ezra, these deported Israelites migrated as a great multitude, he says, across the upper Euphrates. This takes them into the Caucasus and also westwards through Asia Minor. In the migrations of these tribes it was predicted by the prophet Hosea, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people. There it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living God. Clearly referring to a Christianization of these so-called lost tribes. The historian John Wilson studied the migrations of the so-called lost tribes of Israel and produced his lectures on our Israelitish origin, 1876. John Wilson used the research of 17th century French scholar Jacques Abadie, who affirmed that the Israelite tribes migrated into the part of the north which in Constantine's time, he says, was converted to Christianity. He writes up in his Triumph of Providence and Religion, it has been predicted about the people of Ephraim. Ephraim stands for these tribes of Israel from the north, the non-Jewish tribes, that they would grow in number in their exile, and that after having abandoned God during their scattering, they would find him again in their scattering. This is what the prophet Hosea wants us to hear in the first chapter of his Revelations. Here he deliberately distinguishes Judah from the 10 tribes. John Wilson states we are to look for the descendants of all Israel, not only among the Germans and their Anglo-Saxon offspring, but also in Italy, especially in France and Switzerland, the Goths, some of whom passed northward into Scandinavia, the Ostrogoths who turned southward into sunny Italy, and the Visigoths into Spain. Wilson also goes on to refer to the Jews as our kinsmen, as we shall see, he says, even according to the flesh. He goes on to say that the promises made to the fathers are sure to all the seed of Abraham, whether they belong to the circumcision or the uncircumcision, to the Jews within the wall of separation, as well to the branches of Joseph, which have run over the wall. Ezekiel also predicted that the building of this new temple in Jerusalem would coincide with the reuniting of the Judah tribes with the other so-called lost tribes of Israel. In Ezekiel 37 we read of how he has a vision of 2 sticks. Take thee one stick, write upon it for Judah, then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph and for all the house of Israel, his companions, these are the so-called lost tribes, and join them one to another, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. John Wilson writes, this prophet Ezekiel generally denominates this house of the 10 tribes as distinguishing them from the Jews. The lump or mass of Israel is with Ephraim, just as the first fruits were of Judah. Now we might consider some time measures. After entering the promised land, each 50th year was a special year for the biblical Israelites. In Leviticus we read, "You shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you. Ye shall return every man unto his possession." The Jewish Encyclopedia states how that the 50th year, i.e. that following the last year of 7 sabbatical cycles, is the Jubilee. Now in 1517 we read in history that it was that year that the Ottoman Turks captured Jerusalem. But 4 Jubilee periods of 50 years, it's 200 years after 1517, in 1717, the Turkish Ottoman Empire was weakened at the Battle of Belgrade. 6 Jubilee periods after 1517. In 1817, the Turkish Ottoman Empire was further weakened by a Serbian uprising. 7 Jubilee periods after 1517. In 1867, Charles Warren of the Royal Engineers was commissioned by the British Palestine Exploration Fund to survey the Holy Land, Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. This clearly encouraged the idea of Zionism, encouraging Jews to return back to the Holy Land. A few years later, Theodor Herzl published his book, Der Judenstaat, in which he envisioned the founding of the Jewish Israeli state during the 20th century. The Israel.org article says a distinguished gallery of writers, clerics, journalists, artists and statesmen accompanied the awakening of the idea of Jewish restoration in Palestine. Lindsay, Shaftesbury, Palmerston, Disraeli, Manchester, Eliot, Holman Hunt, Charles Warren, Hall Caine, all appear among the many who spoke, wrote, organised, support or put forward practical projects by which Britain might help the return of the Jews to the Holy Land. 8 Jubilee periods after 1517, we come to 1917. Britain then liberated Jerusalem from the Turks. 8 periods of 50 years from 1517. 9 Jubilee periods after 1517 in 1967. The most astonishing military battle of all time. The Jews defeated the combined forces of Egypt, Syria and Jordan and captured Jerusalem. So 1517 plus 4 50-year periods of Jubilees brings us to 1717, when the Ottoman Turks were weakened at the Battle of Belgrade. 1517, the year that the Ottoman Turks captured Jerusalem. 6 Jubilee periods onwards brings us to 1817, when the Ottoman Turks were further weakened during the Serbian uprising. (1517) plus 7 Jubilees brings us to 1867, when the British Palestine Exploration Fund organised the survey of the Holy Land and Jerusalem. So are these 50-year periods of some significance? 1517 plus 8 Jubilees brings us to 1917, when Britain liberated Jerusalem in the First World War. (1517) plus 9 Jubilees, 1967. The Jews retake the whole of Jerusalem. So what about 10 Jubilee periods on from 1517? That brings us to the year 2017. Well, this presentation is in 2016, so really that's next year. It's interesting that the 18th century Methodist scholar Charles Wesley wrote a hymn that anticipated the return of all Israel's tribes to the Holy Land and the building of the Third Temple in Jerusalem. In this hymn he wrote, "Oh, that the chosen band might now their brethren bring, and gathered out of every land present to Zion's King. Of all the ancient race not one be left behind, but each, impelled by secret grace, his way to Canaan find." We know it must be done, for God hath spoke the word. All Israel shall their Saviour own, to their first state restored. Rebuilt by his command, Jerusalem shall rise, her temple on Moriah stand, and touch the skies. Moriah, of course, another name for the Temple Mount. Send then thy servants forth, to call the Hebrews home, from west and east and south and north. Let all the wanderers come, where'er in lands unknown thy fugitives remain. Bid every creature help them on thy holy mount to gain. An offering to their God, there let them all be seen, sprinkled with the water and with blood, in soul and body clean. With Israel's myriads sealed, let all the nations meet, and show thy mystery fulfilled, the family complete.